Welcome to Knife Thoughts. This video is going to be on these knives and really the pattern that these knives are, which is the harness jack. And these are the Rider by CC. So I'll show you the tube here. And this is the latest special factory order for Waynorth Cutlery by Great Eastern Cutlery. And Waynorth Cutlery is Charlie Companion. So Charlie is a really big name in traditional knives, particularly for anyone who appreciates Great Eastern Cutlery. He helped to popularize Great Eastern Cutlery with his special factory orders, and including the TC Barlow, which is what really got me into Great Eastern Cutlery with this first knife I ever got from GEC. And he's always been extremely friendly and generous with his time and his knowledge to really everyone in the hobby. If you're on blade forums or have ever been to the rendezvous at Great Eastern Cutlery, you know that he is, just someone who knows a lot about the knives and clearly has a passion for them and is willing to share it. And I really appreciate that. I think that it's a great thing for the hobby when people who are so passionate and so knowledgeable are willing to share it. So I always really enjoy getting Charlie's special factory orders. Like I say, I have really loved his TC Barlows. I have several of them. And it's just nice to have knives that are designed by and from someone who has, had an influence on your appreciation of the hobby, like Charlie has for me. Now, Charlie actually started doing special factory orders with harness jacks, which is again what this pattern is, while by Queen Cutlery, while Bill Howard, who is now the head of Great Eastern Cutlery, was the head cutler at Queen. So this was in 2004, and I just want to mention I am going to have an article on these knives and the harness jack that will include some of Charlie's articles that he did around that time. I definitely suggest checking those out because they're really where I found all of this information about the harness jack. Really, most of the info I could find on harness jacks was either by or in reference to Charlie and his knives. So he started by ordering harness jacks because, in his retirement, he said he was looking for a hobby and had always appreciated knives and started kind of just buying them willy-nilly like we probably all started doing when we started into the hobby. Barlows and trappers and things like that. But there's just so many Barlows and trappers that, you can't get them all. And so he ended up getting into harness jacks and found that they were harder to find and a little bit more interesting for him. And so he decided to have some made by Queen because really there wasn't anyone making harness jacks at that time, so the early 2000s. It was a pattern that had kind of died out. Now, what is a harness jack? So a harness jack is a knife that has a main blade. It's often a spear point, but as you can see, it can be other things like a clip point. And then it has a secondary tool, which is a punch or awl. So a punch or awl is a tool that's used basically to pierce and ream things. So particularly with the name harness jack, it is a leather punch. So you can create a hole in leather, which is what harnesses, were made of, and fix your tack on your, your horse or on your harness and all kinds of other leather things. So that's what a harness jack is. It usually has a swell end or sleeve board shape. There are sometimes other shapes that have this, blade configuration and therefore can be considered harness jacks, but usually it will be a swell end or a sleeve board, and every now and then an equal end knife also. Now, it's a pattern that was really popular up until around the 1930s. And so if you think about it, before cars, before automobiles, pretty much everything, before the engine was ubiquitous, pretty much everything was run by horsepower. So machines, everyone got everywhere by horses, carriages, mail was carried by horses, and pretty much everything ran by horsepower. So everyone from farmers to businessmen, farmers using horses to grow their food and such, and businessmen getting around in the city needed to be able to repair their harness if they had an issue. So it was really popular, and actually there was an interesting kind of flurry of patents filed for different versions of the punch or awl in the 1910s, probably to capitalize on World War I happening, and wanting to secure their spot with each person's individual version of the awl. I'm hoping to have some old catalog pictures in the article on these knives, so definitely go check that out. I always love getting to check out those old catalogs and the old patents, but they're not always great for in the video. So it was very popular at that time, and it kind of died out in the 30s with the rise of automobiles, and also I think probably just more use of metal in day-to-day items. So whereas before, probably everything, all of your goods were made from leather and other kind of softer materials, as industry and metalworking became more prominent. I also wonder about aluminum becoming more prominent, if it didn't have an effect on the need for a punch or an awl. They kind of died out in the 30s and didn't make a resurgence until Charlie brought them back in the 2000s. So it's really cool to see that they have come back. Charlie has had several versions made. The one kind of caveat to that I find pretty interesting is that camp or scout knives kind of always had an awl. So for example, a Swiss Army knife, which is kind of its own pattern, but there are other, examples like camp knives. The Boy Scout knife often had a punch or awl. And so the reason for that is that when you're camping, if you have your backpack with a leather strap, it's more likely that you will need to be able to repair that than it would have been when everyone was using leather for their horses. So it's interesting that it kind of continued, the punch itself continued with camp knives and scout knives, while the harness jack with a little bit more specific use kind of died out. But it's a really cool thing that Charlie has brought this pattern back, and he has done several different versions, both from Queen and then from Great Eastern Cutlery, once Bill moved to Great Eastern Cutlery and then Queen itself died out. So this is the most recent special factory order that Charlie has done, and I want to show you the tube because it's always really cool reading the tubes. Charlie does a great job of these write-ups, and I really like the kind of iconography of this knife also. Now, one thing is, I wonder if it's not Charlie kind of riding off into the sunset there. I do kind of get the feeling from talking with him that is a little bit, this is hopefully not the last SFO, but moving in that direction maybe. And so I do enjoy that. I think that this is a great tube art. You can see the rider riding off into the sunset there, and just really cool. I appreciate the tube art and the write-ups that Charlie does a lot. I think it makes the knives even more special. Now, as for the knives, they are on Great Eastern Cutlery's number 86 pattern. So it's a pattern that Great Eastern Cutlery has actually done a lot, and Charlie had another SFO on this pattern. He had the blackjack. Now, I actually don't have it out. I don't have it at hand to show it to you, but it had a pen blade rather than an awl or punch as the secondary. So this 86 pattern is a relatively large pattern. I'll show you it in comparison to the 15, which is GEC's kind of medium-sized pattern, and then in comparison to a Case Trapper, which is well-known larger pattern, and you can see it's between those two in its length. So it's a relatively large pattern, and I think that is a good thing for a harness jack, because you want to be able to get a good grip on it and use that awl if you need to. Now, as I said, this version has a clip point. It is a classic GEC clip point. I think it looks really great, and the tag stamps are Waynorth Cutlery, which is Charlie's brand. So Waynorth is actually Charlie's username on blade forums. So it's really cool that he has created this brand with Waynorth Cutlery. You can see Buffalo, New York, which is where he's from, and then Oil the Joints USA on the back. There's actually only been a couple of knives with those stamps. So there was the Lambfoot on the 93 pattern that Charlie had made, and then the Blackjack, and then now this, the Rider by Cece. And it's really cool. I'm really glad that Charlie got this stamp on these knives again, because Charlie did have an SFO between the Blackjack and these knives, and it was a camp knife, a scout knife, the Wiki scout knife, and it didn't have the Waynorth stamp. So I was a little disappointed in that, because I really like to see that Waynorth stamp on these. I in fact when it came out that GEC supposedly wasn't doing any more SFOs, I felt really bad that Charlie had gotten the stamps made to make these tank stamps and wasn't going to be able to use them anymore. So I with the help of a fellow member of GECC on Facebook, had some designs made that I have some shirts and hats and stuff with those that kind of I got made because I love the brand and to help support Charlie. But now he has been doing SFOs again. So I just really like to see those tang stamps on there. I think that it's really special, really makes it his own brand, which I think Charlie deserves. Now the etch and the name, the Rider by Cece, is kind of interesting. So there's a movie, Cece Rider, and apparently there's kind of a little bit of a lewd connotation to that term, Cece Rider, that I had no idea about. I've never seen the movie and did not know that the term had the connotation that it had, so he decided not to use that and instead call it the Rider by Cece, which is Charlie Companion. So I think it's really cool. It alludes to the fact that it's a harness jack, but has its own flair to it. And then another interesting thing about these knives is that they have an Empire shield. So another thing that Charlie has collected is knives from Empire Cutlery Company. So it's an old cutlery company that made some really, really beautiful knives at the turn of the century, the 20th century, and really was one of the best liked of the brands at that time. And so he has collected that and has a really beautiful display of Empire knives, and this is a shield that was used by that company. So it's really cool to see this shield on these knives that are for Charlie. Now, as for the handle materials, you can see there's two different ones, and these came, there were these two different handle materials. They didn't necessarily come as a set, but I was lucky enough to get both. And there is smooth white bone, which is this one here, and I'm really happy with the smooth white bone that I got. You can see that it has a good bit of character to it, and I really like that. It really looks beautiful. Smooth white bone is a simple handle material, but I think it looks great. And then the other one is Gabon Ebony. So I'll show you that, Gabon Ebony wood. You can see the pattern number 861223P, the P being for punch. And Charlie said that this ebony is actually instrument grade. So it's really high quality wood, and I think it looks really great. In fact, while I love the smooth white bone, I think that the ebony is really just super classy looking. It looks very traditional and vintage to me. Now, these knives are made superbly. I think that Bill, throws a little bit of extra niceness onto the knives for Charlie. This that you see here is just some wax. I'll have to wipe that off. I put some Renaissance wax on these, but you can see no gaps. Really, the shield is superbly done. Every now and then, relatively commonly you see shield gaps on GEC knives, but not here. The tips of the punches are kind of proud on both of mine. So, I can kind of catch on both of those, but I can get at them pretty easily with that little pseudo easy open that they put on there. So I appreciate that. Pretty comfortable in the hand because it is a relatively thick knife. So if you were going to use this knife, which I even said to Charlie, I always kind of have trouble because I always want to use the knives, but that they're super collectible, so you don't think you should use them. And he said, yeah, kind of maybe keep one. Don't use them both. And I think that probably most people are not using these knives because they are so collectible. Now, these knives I actually did get from Charlie, and so that's also really meaningful to me. But a nice thing was it seemed like a lot of people who wanted these were able to get them in comparison to actually the regular run of 86s that GEC did, like this, the Marrowbone Barlow. So it is nice to see that a lot of people were able to get them. Now, I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of people watching this that weren't able to get them and are kind of upset by that, but I am glad to see that Charlie was able to get these to a good number of people, because I think that they're really beautiful knives. I think that it's really special that Charlie was able to get this special factory order done of a really, really classic harness jack. And so I really appreciate having them myself. I appreciate, the history behind them with Charlie, that they are Waynorth cutlery knives made by Great Eastern Cutlery, kind of bringing the harness jack and Charlie's part in the traditional knife world full circle. So I love these knives. I'm really happy to have them. I hope you've enjoyed getting to check them out. And again, I hope you check out the article, which will have some more kind of primary sources and things like that. Thank you to Charlie for always being such a help and just, talking with me, sharing his knowledge and passion, and for allowing me to get these knives. And last but not least, as always, don't forget to go out and do good.